we all know, about 80 years prior to the current RWBY timeline, there was a war that spanned the entire world of Remnant, or at least the 4 major continents, that came to be known as the Great War, because it spanned all 4 continents. It was Mantle and Mistral, Mantle, which came to be known as Atlas after the war, versus Vale at the beginning of the war. And eventually Vacuo ended up being dragged into the war, joined Vale's side, and brought victory to Vale. And then the Huntsman schools were founded, etc., etc. We know this story already thanks to what has already been explained in the RWBY world, and also what has been explained in the World of Remnant side stories. Now, in my opinion, there is definitely going to be a second Great War. And this is because of a couple things. First of all, in the World of Remnant, when they focused on the Great War, at the end, as Ozpin was narrating, he said, if we don't learn from the events of history, we are destined to repeat it. Now, to me, that foreshadows that overall the human race isn't going to learn from any of this, and it is going to be repeated. And even if the human race does learn from their former misfallings with the past war, you know, it was a war that was a little bit of discrimination against the faunus as well as everything else that was involved with it. With Salem in actively trying to gather all of the relics at this point in time, it is already involving both Vale has been involved and Haven has been involved. Atlas, we've seen with Ironwood, is already getting involved in that as well, closing their borders, forming up the military, etc., to fight this battle. And with that being the case, that's already 3 out of the 4 major land masses that are already getting involved. Not to mention Menagerie, the 5th, not continent, but settlement of Faunus. There are many other settlements on each of the continents other than, you know, the 4 main cities, but Menagerie, being associated with the White Fang, now broken away from the White Fang and forming the new Faunus Association that's going to be led by Blake's father, that is also going to likely be involved in the war. Now, another thing that is also to mention, with the fall of Vale, the entire world is already affected by the actions of Salem, because now the global communication system is down. Their global communication has been cut off. And that being the case, it would definitely be a bit difficult to organize a large-scale war and a large-scale counterattack against Salem's faction. Now, what I wanted to actually discuss in this video is what exactly the divide is going to be in this war. Now, the obvious answer would be Salem on one side with her faction and the Grimm fighting against all of the other people of Remnant. Now, that could be the case, and I could see that becoming the case, but we don't know where Vacuo stands. We don't really know much about Vacuo. You know, Sun's team is from Vacuo initially, but other than that, we don't know anything about Vacuo. It's also known as the Lawless Community, so I wouldn't be surprised if learning about that, Salem already has influence or even possibly control over Vacuo already. Now, granted, we don't know anything about that, so we can't really guess at that just yet. So far, Haven has been pretty much decimated with all of the huntsmen and huntresses, or at least many of them that were associated with the school, being taken out by Lionwood by sending them Lionheart by having him send them on dangerous missions and having them be killed on those missions, as Crow found out. So a lot of the fighting force, at least from Haven Academy, not necessarily all of that continent as a whole, because there are many other settlements, and once the war comes around, every able-bodied fighter is probably going to side with Ozpin from the continent of Mistral, just because, you know, Salem hasn't really treated them that nicely. Now, Salem is already having her 3 remaining generals, Watts, Tyrion, and Hazel. They're going to be probably a leading force in that army. I don't know if Mercury and Emerald are actually going to stay with her. I have a feeling they're probably going to switch sides, especially with what happened to Cinder and how she was treated. And, you know, I personally, this is my belief, that Cinder is in fact dead. I did make an entire video on this, on who's going to be the next Fall Maiden, but that's just my personal opinion. Other people will argue otherwise, and that's completely fine. We will find out in Volume 6 or later on in the RWBY series, because we may not actually touch on that in Volume 6. She might just show up later, if she's still alive. That being the case, though, with that being said, so I believe that Haven, or at least Mistral and Vale, with that continent, and also Menagerie, are going to be on Ozpin's side when this war comes around. Vacuo, still up in the air because we don't know anything about that actual continent. We know it's governed as lawless, or known as the Lawless Society, as I said before, so there could go one way or the other depending on how it plays out. The wild card, though, is Atlas, because we know that Dr. Watts actually has connections to the Atlesian military, meaning that it was also possibly his virus that was installed into the system at the fall of Beacon that took control of the Atlesian Knights, as well as also hacked the global communication system. If that is the case, then Dr. Watts has the capability to take control of the Atlesian military if he's given access. Now, how would he get access? Well, as I made, and again, another previous video on this, with the Schnee family being the enemy of Atlas, Jacques Schnee isn't looking too kindly on Ironwood at the moment, especially since Ironwood's closing all the borders and hurting Jacques' actual business with importing and exporting dust. So, that being the case, I have a feeling that Jacques is either going to try in some way to overthrow Ironwood, or at least let Watts into the country and give him access in some way, shape, or form to the Atlesian military to take it over. So, my guess is how this is all going to play out is that at least a majority of the human and faunus populations are going to be against Salem, but the overall war is actually going to be between Salem, whatever supporters she has, her generals being the main ones, and also potentially half of Vacuo or a majority of Vacuo, or at least some portion of Vacuo, I think will join her, because they didn't state that, Vacuo is the lawless community for nothing. And then it will also be the Grimm that Salem is likely in control of, and also the Atlesian Knights, at least the Atlesian Knights for the first part of it, because they were able to deactivate the hijacking system in the fall of Beacon. Granted, if it's going to be this way with the overall army, if they take over Atlas, then there's going to be a little bit more of an intricate system, and they're probably going to have to first attack Atlas, take that over to take out the Atlesian military, and then go attack that continent in the top left corner that Salem is likely holed up in. And that being the case, I think that's how the war is going to play out, and also how the events of RWBY overall are going to play out, because they are on the way to Atlas right now. Whether they get there or not is kind of up in the air, because we were kind of just there with Weiss, and with the borders being closed, I think they're going to have a difficult time with that. So I think that they're actually going to head to Vacuo. We'll find out about that. Then this war is going to begin. They're going to have to go to Atlas at that point to take out the Atlesian military, and then go off to fight the final battle at Salem's headquarters. Now, there's obviously going to be a lot more that happens in between those major events. For example, they're still going to have to go to other schools. They're still going to have to revisit Beacon to get the relic that is there. But I don't know if that's going to play a part between Vacuo and Atlas, before Vacuo, after Atlas, how that's all going to fold out. But at least for the overall events of the war, that's what I think is going to happen. And I could be wrong that the war may not even happen at all, but I think there's strong enough implications that it might. And with the entire world being involved in Salem's plot, it seems likely. And I should also touch on that as well. We don't know exactly what Salem's plot is. She just wants to destroy or snuff out the hope of humanity, which is an evil enough plot that I think a majority of the people in the world of Remnant would fight against. So overall, Menagerie, Vale, and Haven, at least the people remaining in Haven and Mistral, will all fight together against Salem's faction, as well as any people who are able to get away from Atlas, or at least once Atlas is retaken over after, I believe, Watts is going to take the Atlesian military and probably hold all the people there hostage. Once they take that out, then the people of Atlas will fight against them as well, and eventually Vacuo will join that fight on top of that. So they'll be fighting against, at least at the beginning, in my opinion, Salem any supporters that she has, all of the Grimm that she controls, which is also heavily implied that she does have control over Grimm, with the corruption being in all of her arms, her eyes, etc., and also Grimm spawning in the territory that she controls. And then, as well, the Atlesian military fighting alongside the Grimm and her faction. So her faction's going to be fairly strong, even if she doesn't have that many full-on supporters that are either like the humans or Faunus of those territories. She's going to have enough to fight everyone else in the world of Remnant. And there's also one other thing that I want to touch on. We know that Raven is the Spring Maiden and that Cinder is or was the Fall Maiden. Now, whether Cinder's dead or not, I'm not going to necessarily focus on that, because I did make a previous video about that, but with the other two maidens, I wouldn't be surprised if at least one of them supported Salem. Because we know now that Raven has turned on Salem. Salem's not going to trust her anymore, because she did trust Raven to get that relic in Haven, and that didn't end up happening, so Salem's probably not going to trust Raven, especially since Cinder tried to take the power from Raven. So Raven's likely going to side with Ozpin's faction by the end, either that, or she's going to end up passing on her powers to someone else that's going to fight with Ozpin's faction in the end. Now, as for Winter and Summer, we don't know exactly, we don't know anything about who they are or where they are in the world. And I wouldn't be surprised, as I mentioned, if one of them sides with Salem, at least at the beginning of the fight. Because it wouldn't make much sense overall if Ozpin's faction just gets, or it wouldn't make much of a story overall if Ozpin's faction just gets all of the 4 relics and Salem just ends up having nothing and is just fighting to try to get them. There's going to have to be some reason that Team RWBY is going to have to go to Salem's area, or Salem's headquarters, to fight her, and for some reason, whether it's to reclaim one of the relics that she already took, whether it's to reclaim one of their comrades that she kidnapped, or both. My guess is probably both. And there's going to have to be some reason, some force that is driving this war, some reason that they will have to defeat Salem at that point in the story, because she has something that will destroy the world of Remnant, hurt the people of the world of Remnant, or do something untoward towards everything. And we might find out that, Salem is only one part of the overall enemy of the world, because, as I've been having discussion with other people in the comments, Ozpin, we don't exactly know what his grand motivations are. We know that he's at least seeming like he's trying to save the world of Remnant and the people within it, but other things could be revealed that might make him more of an enemy as well. But those are overall my thoughts on what will be the more endgame of RWBY, that there's a second Great War, and that's what's going to be the final finale and the final fight. So let me know what you guys think down in the comments. I know a lot of this is more assumptions and conjecture, but it's fun to theorize, so let me know what you guys think, and if you like this video and want to see more, make sure to hit that subscribe button, and I'll see you in the next video.